Welcome back to another episode of the Odd or God Pod, where we talk about sobriety, spirituality, and everything in between. This week, we have a very special episode. I'm sitting down with somebody who has truly made it out of the nightmare of addiction into the dream of recovery, and his story is blowing people away all across the world. He's been speaking at meetings internationally and sharing his experience, strength, and hope with people all around the world, and we are super grateful to have him here with us today and have him share that story with us. I'm super excited to introduce Andrew. Andrew, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Andrew. My sobriety date is October 26th of 2016. So I just recently celebrated 7 years of continuous sobriety.
That's awesome, man. And we're super, congratulations, first of all, 7 years. That's an accomplishment, man. And I hope you had a good holiday too. This is, we're shooting this the day after Christmas. So all of you watching, we hope you had a Merry Christmas as well. Looking forward to 2024 and all the things that we have in store. Also, quick shout out, we are using a studio here in Tempe. We are appreciative of letting us use the space. Hopefully that we can continue working with you. Just wanted to throw that in there. So let me stop rambling here, and I'm going to let you kind of tell us a little bit about what brought you to recovery. What did your life look like prior to October 2016?
So, by the way, everybody, Merry Christmas. So my recovery journey originally started in 2012. I went through a faith-based program called Teen Challenge and also another one called Victory Outreach. At the time, I was about 21 years old and I wasn't really into it. It was kind of forced. So before October of 2016, my life was a complete shit show. A year prior to that, I had got introduced into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps after coming off of a fatal car accident. And before that, my life was pretty rough. I was on heroin, meth, and pretty much anything else you could possibly think of. I was the kind of addict that would smoke ibuprofen off tinfoil to try and get well. And by the way, it doesn't work. But yeah, man, like I remember working at the Suns Arena and the Diamondback Stadium. And I remember like coming home to random people in my house. I had let my best friend at the time come and live with me because he got kicked out of his brother's house. And he also was my dealer. So instead of paying me rent, he paid me in heroin and meth, and I would work and pay the bills. So that worked out for about a couple months, and I was notorious for falling asleep at the wheel. And I would always find a place to fall asleep at. So like I would pull into like a Denny's parking lot or a Walmart or really any parking lot I could find, sleep for a couple hours, wake up and drive home like nothing happened, and it was fine. Well, this particular night, and this was on October 29th of 2015, I was driving home from work and I had fallen asleep at the wheel, pulled into a gas station, fell asleep, didn't even turn the truck off. And when I woke up, I went and drove again and I fell asleep again. And when I woke up the second time, I had plowed through a tree, 2 parked cars and a brick wall, and I got out of the truck and they had told me that there was a body laying in the grass, and I'd hit somebody on a bicycle and he died 3 hours later. I remember sitting in the police van. I remember asking the cops like constantly, is this guy going to be okay? Is he okay? Because I genuinely cared. Like, you know, I genuinely wanted the guy to live, not only for him to live, but at the time, and I know this sounds really selfish, but at the time I was also concerned about myself too and what was going to happen to me, right? And so they ultimately told me that he had passed away. And by the grace of God, I didn't go to jail that night because they couldn't prove that I was on anything. So when about a week later I got home, Well, they take me home that night, but a week later, I'm sitting in my apartment, and things have gotten real bad, right? Things between me and my roommate. It was his truck that I crashed, so he was pissed. His room, everybody else that was living there was pissed. And they were all mad that I didn't go to jail, even though I didn't tell the cops anything. So I had called my family, and I was like, look, I need to get to rehab, and I need to do it tonight because I will die. And I remember had that conversation with my mom. I said, if you don't come pick me up now, I will probably be dead by the end of the night. And so she came and picked me up. I sat at her house for about a day, and we got me into Chandler Valley Hope. And that's where I went to the first time. And I ended up going there twice. And I remember getting into the program and reading the 12 steps on the wall. And I didn't really know what to make of it. To me, it was more of, I need help, and my life is completely unmanageable at this point. Like, there's nothing left, right? And I remember seeing, like, the God part, and I didn't really want anything to do with that because from my experience at Victory Outreach and Teen Challenge and stuff. And, for anybody if that is your journey, that's awesome. I'm really happy. If that works for you, that's great. It just wasn't for me at the time. And so I got to, and they started telling me, like, this could be a God of your own understanding. It could be whatever you want. And so my higher power became the fellowship. And I remember my sponsor was telling me, like, hey, do you want to see an example of a power greater than yourself? I'm like, yeah, like, I'm one of those people. If I can't see it, I'm not going to believe you. Right? And so they said, okay, go turn on the air conditioning and make Phoenix not be 115 degrees outside. I was like, I can't do that. And they're like, exactly. That's a power greater than you. Take all these leaves on these trees and make them stop blowing at the same time. I'm like, I can't do that either. I only got two hands. They're like, exactly. That's power greater than yourself. I was like, all right. So it started to make sense to me, right? And so started going to meetings, got introduced to, started having a sponsor, went through a few of them. But I still wasn't really that serious at the time. Like, I was, but I was kind of doing it for the wrong reasons. And I kind of just went and BS'd my way through the steps. I ended up relapsing on 4th of July of 2016 and was in and out for a couple months, went back to Chandler Valley Hope. And I remember the last time I relapsed and got sober, I was looking at myself in the mirror, and I remember telling myself, like, either you're going to do this now or you're never going to do it, right? And the crazy part that started to happen, because growing up, when I was born, I had open heart surgery at 10 days old. And life growing up was difficult because I had a really hard time fitting in and I had a really hard time making friends and keeping them, right? Because I didn't know how, really. And I remember just doing anything possible to try and make friends. And so, when I found drugs and alcohol, I thought that, hey, I found my people, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I fit in with these people.
That sense of ease and comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. It was like, hey, these guys like to do drugs. I like to do drugs. This is great, right? And but I learned over time when I got sober that, those people weren't my friends. They were my friends because we did drugs together, but when things got crazy and shit hit the fan, like, they were gone. But when I came into the room, then I came back this time around, they were there. They welcomed me with open arms, and it was something that really helped me be okay with being there.
Right. And amidst all of this, you're still dealing with the legal ramifications of like what's going on, or no?
No. So I'll get into that in a second. So about 10 months into my sobriety this time, I was doing my fifth step. I'm the only person I know that got arrested doing his fifth step, by the way. So I was doing my fifth step, which for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's basically telling your sponsor everything you've ever done and every messed up thing you've ever done. And I'm telling him stuff, and I'm doing my fears list, and the next thing on there was prison. And I remember I get this knock at the door, and I'm sure we all know what a cop knock sounds like. No need to demonstrate. Yeah. So I do the little tweaker peek out the blinds, and I look over there, and it's a mailman, and I'm like, okay, like this is why this guy's having a bad day. And I look at my sponsors; it was at his house, and I was like, you're gonna answer this? Like, I'm not. And so he answers it, and they say, hey, we have a package for Andrew Adamson, only he can sign it. And I'm like, what? I didn't order anything. Like. So I look at the package, and it says Department of Economic Security. And I'm like, okay, like DES. I got stuff in collections, right? So I sign it, and as soon as I put the pen down, they grab my arm, and they said, don't move. And I kind of like jerked a little bit, and he's like, don't move. And I'm like, okay. And I look over, and there's 6 sheriff deputies running up with guns and a canine unit. And let me see your hands, screaming at the top of their lungs. And they run up, they put me in handcuffs. My sponsor's over here trying not to piss himself and have a heart attack at the same time. And so I go to jail. They said, do you know what this is about? And I kind of gave them like a smart ass answer. Like, I got a pretty good idea, but if you don't mind refreshing my memory, that would be cool, And they said, they're like, Mr. Adamson, you've been indicted on manslaughter charges and your bond is $100,000. I said, okay. Well, shit, this is really happening. So they take me down to 4th Avenue. So by $100,000, it means if anybody's ever been to jail or been on bond, 10% of that plus collateral. So my family put together $10,000 in cash, and my mom put up her house for collateral. And she told me when she bonded me out, she's like, if you try to run, you will not make it to jail. And she meant that shit. Yeah. Mama was crazy. Mama's great, but Mama was crazy. And so I got out of jail, and I went to a meeting that night and talked to a bunch of people and was like, hey, like, this is what happened, right? And I remember sitting in that jail cell, and there was this guy, and he's sitting there detoxing. And I gave him my phone number. And I was like, hey, man, give me a call if you ever want help, right? And this is before I ever even knew that I was getting out. And so I get out and I continue doing my steps. I go finish my 5th step along with, the rest of them all the way through 12. And I start talking to people, telling them what's going on. And a lot of people kind of already knew that this had happened to me because I'd shared a couple times in meetings, days that I was struggling and stuff like that. But, when it really started to happen, they were like, cool, we're going to pack as many cars as we possibly can, and we're going to basically bring the entire pigeon coop to court. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what they did. I ended up showing up to court at 18 months sober with 30 people and about 50 plus character letters, whether I knew them personally or not. And so I was looking at originally 7 to 21 years in prison with the presumptive of 10.5, which is typically what the sentence range for manslaughter is. And they knocked it down to negligent homicide, and I signed for 5 to 8 years, and they gave me 5. So I went and did 30 days in county while I was waiting for sentencing. And while I was in there, I got this guy, I'll never forget, we're still friends to this day, actually. I got him into a house called Leo's Alumni House from county jail. Oh. And when I got to DOC, I went down to Yuma, and I started getting involved in the meetings. I went back to school, got back into Rio Salado, and I ended up starting my associate's degree, which I ultimately ended up finishing before I got out. And I got an associate's in addiction and substance abuse. And I also was involved in the meetings down there for like AA and NA. And down there, like in prison, it's the same. Like AA, NA, tomato, right? Mm. Like I know out here they don't like each other like Republicans and Democrats, but in there it's the same. And so when I was about 1.5 years in, there was a flyer on the wall, and it said, looking for a recovery support specialist. And, depending on your charges, sometimes you qualify for stuff, sometimes you don't. And that was almost everything I didn't qualify for because of the nature of my charges. And my buddy comes up and he's like, hey, man, you should check that out. I was like, all right. So I did later that day. I was like, I'll go look at it, I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, shit, I actually qualify for this. Like, all right, cool. So I end up sending a letter, and they interview me. I end up getting the job, and they take me over, and I get certified through Arizona Complete Health as a recovery support specialist, which I still am to this day. It's good for life unless I mess it up. So they end up shipping me out to Globe, and I spent my last 2.5 years out there with a buddy of mine running wellness recovery classes.
Wow.
Well as
in the DOC,
prison.
yeah. Wow, man.
Yeah,
So,
prison.
I mean, I want to just kind of take a pause here and get your thoughts on something, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners are thinking the same thing I am. You're about a little under 2 years sober, and you get hit with 5 years in prison. Yeah. I mean, for a lot of us, I mean, at that point, you might be in that situation where you're either going to grab the fuck it bucket and go down in a blaze of glory, yeah, or do the route that you did. And you went in clean and sober. And not only did you go in clean and sober, you then get enrolled into classes, you become a peer support specialist, and you do all of this stuff while you're in there. And you use those 5 years to like build to what you still are today, right? Yeah. I mean, walk us through that, man. What was going through your mind at that time, and how did you maintain your sobriety through all of that?
So a lot of it, I was fixated on that release date, right? Like I did not want that to change, and nothing was going to make me do something that would potentially change it. I also had a lot of support from out here, from people that I knew from the meetings, as well as my family.
And people still kept in contact with you. And did you keep the same sponsor while you were in?
I did. So I did keep the same sponsor for all 4 years that I was in there. And I had friends from the program writing me throughout the time that I was in there. So it was nice. I was very fortunate to have that support, because a lot of people in there don't have that. They don't have anything, sober or not.
Right. And there is drugs and alcohol in prison.
Oh, it's everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not like you go to prison and all of a sudden it's very easy to stay sober. I mean, you're faced with that every day that you're in there.
Yeah, it was everywhere. And so, I mean, I had it readily available any time of the day, night, whenever I could. So, I mean, I think everybody pretty much knows that, right? And so, but yeah, it definitely was. It was challenging at times. There were times where I definitely thought about it, but there were two things that really kept me from doing it. One, I didn't want to change my sobriety date or my release date, and number two, I also was broke. Yeah, and it's significantly more expensive in there than it is out here. So, and I just didn't want anything to do with that life anymore. I was done. Yeah. I mean, look where heroin and alcohol and meth and all this stuff got me. I ended up taking somebody's life. Like, thank God he didn't have any kids. But I took a husband away from a wife, took a son away from his mother and father. Like, that's what doing drugs got me. So it was definitely something that I just didn't want anything to do with that life anymore. And I also didn't want a target on my back.
Right. And you kind of touched on a little bit about being turned off from the whole God idea just based off of your experience in, different programs that you were in prior. I mean, how did your relationship with the God of your own understanding kind of grow throughout your time in prison? Because I'm sure you had to rely a lot on that aspect of things while you were in there as well.
I did. And so every night before I went to sleep, I would say the serenity prayer, right? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I ended up breaking that down into 3 different parts, right? Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. I can't change what anybody else thinks about me. I can't change what other people do, right? And the courage to change the things I can. So the things I can change how I feel about things and what I do and what I say, right? And the wisdom to know the difference. And sometimes we want to change what everybody else does or thinks, right, about us or about certain situations. And we don't want to change anything in ourselves. Because if you're anything like me, I'm stubborn as hell.
Yep.
And so being able to kind of shift that into being like, okay, I'm going to change how I view things and what I do in order to better my own life and also to have a better impact on the people around me, because there's a ripple effect, right? So think of it, you drop a rock into a pond, you see those waves and they go out. That's all the way to the shore, no matter how far it is. You know, so my life and my actions are going to impact my family, my friends. You know, if I do something and I get more time, that's going to impact my family. Mm-hmm. You know, the people that are rooting for me and wanting me to come home. So that was kind of one of the main driving forces. And yeah, I would say that prayer every night before I went to bed. And also to help me get through the time so I can come home.
Right. And it's cool that you touch on that, because that's such a big part of the program in general. No matter what 12 steps that you work, it describes as an actor scenario, right? Where it's like we always want to convince ourselves that if we were running the show and if everybody would just do what we wanted them to do, then everything would be fine. But it's like that's when the serenity prayer comes in, because it's like, no, I can't change all of these external things. All you can really control is your reaction to things and how you move forward, right?
Right.
And that's awesome that you touched on that. So you go to school, you know, you get these certifications, they move you up the globe. What were you?
So I was a peer facilitator for a class called Wellness Recovery, and then I also would chair meetings as well for AA and NA. I did that for a little while because we used to have a guy who would come in and run the meetings. It was like an H&I. But then there was this little thing that happened out here in the real world called COVID.
Wow, I didn't even think of that.
That got shut down, as well as all of our in-person visitation. So I ended up going 18 months without seeing my family in person.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd still see them, like they do video visits and stuff, so I'd be able to do that. But I mean, there's nothing like a hug from your mom or your dad or your brother, and so.
So you were kind of the main guy in there from that point, so the entire last 18 months that you were in there, because there was nobody coming in for H&Is.
There was a few of us that were doing it. So I wasn't the main guy by any means. There was a few of us that were doing it. As far as the wellness recovery, I was doing it, but the guy that was doing it with me, he was kind of the main guy doing it. And I was kind of just learning from him because he had experience with facilitating and stuff like that, as well as a lot more life experience than I did too. So I learned a lot from him. And so when I got out in June 13th of 2022. So I've been out for a little over 18 months. And I got back into the meetings, and I remember going to Birds of a Feather at Pigeon Coop, and I remember just looking around. And before I went in 2018, that place was almost standing room only. Mm-hmm. And when I got out, it was 5-10 people maybe. I'm looking at my friend what the fuck? Where is everybody? And then I see I learned what Zoom is. I see this little screen or whatever. I'm like, what is that? And they're like, oh, that's for the Zoom. And I'm like, what? They're like, COVID messed everything up. It was bad. And I'm like, oh. Because all I knew was what the media told me, what my family told me, or what the COs would tell me. Yeah. Right? And usually it's 3 different stories.
Yeah.
So I didn't know from firsthand, I didn't know the impact that it had out here. I only knew what it was doing in there. And in there, it wasn't a whole lot different. It was just locked down.
Right.
So I was like, okay, it's not that much different.
Yeah. I imagine that was quite a shock when you found out all these meetings are hybrid meetings now. Most people are tuning in on Zoom. And in 2022 was kind of the back half of things, but Yeah, man, I got sober in 2020 initially, and like it was like that's all I had known because I got out of rehab, and it was just like, okay, well, here's a list of all the Zoom meetings you can go to, and good luck, you know?
Yeah, and they're like, oh, here, wear this mask, and I'm like, what? Okay. So in there we had them, but I mean, I'd wear them if they made me, but half the time I didn't want to wear that. And so about 3 weeks after I got out of prison, I started working at this IOP treatment center called Choice Recovery, which I still work at today. And about a month after that, I got home one night and I started having this pain in my chest. And I was like, oh, okay, this is weird. I'm like, I'll be fine, it'll pass, right? And it didn't. It started getting worse. And at first I'm like, oh man, like I thought I was having a heart attack. And so I go to the hospital, and when I get there, I was off the night. It was on a Thursday night, and I'm usually off on Fridays, right? So I'm like, okay, I can go to the hospital, get some fluids in me. They, maybe give me some medicine, and I go home, and it's fine. I don't even have to tell my boss what happened, right? Like everything's cool.
Right. A routine visit.
I was wrong. So the doctor comes in. They said, Andrew, you have an aortic aneurysm. So basically an aneurysm on your heart, which I think the best way to describe that would be if you have like an air bubble on your tire, right? If it pops, you blow your tire.
Yeah.
Well, it's like that, but on your aorta. And if it pops, you're dead before you hit the ground.
Wow.
You'll just walk one day and you just fall over.
Wow.
And so they say, like, we need to fix this. We're like, okay. And they said it's an open surgery. Surgery's going to be about 4 to 6 hours. You'll be knocked out for about 24 hours. It's like, all right, well, what's the survival rate? They're like, well, for most people, it's 98%, but for you, it's about 90. I'm like, oh, all right, that's not bad.
Yeah, 9 out of 10. Yeah. I mean, I like those odds.
Good odds, right? I'd bet on those. And so I was like, all right, well, let's just do it then. I'm already here. So I called my boss. And I did not want to call them, man. I was like, fuck.
You're like, I just started working.
I just started working. Like, everything's coming together. And I called them, and oh, my God, man. Like, they were so supportive. They were like, Andrew, don't worry about your job. Just get better. And I was like, I cried. I didn't cry on the phone because I wanted to not. But I hung up that phone, and I was just like, oh, my God. And so I ended up going into surgery. The surgery lasted, so they told me it'd last 4 to 6 hours. I'd be knocked out for 24. Surgery actually lasted 14 hours, and I went out Monday morning, and I woke up Friday afternoon.
Wow.
Yeah. And this was all at Banner Desert, and I woke up, and I tried to like move. So if you've never had open heart surgery, or if you have, you might know this. When you come out of open heart surgery, you cannot move. Your body is basically a balloon because I was so full of fluid. And so when I woke up, I remember trying to get up, and the nurse was like, hey, don't move. I'm like, what is happening? And they're like, you can't move, right? Like, and so I started having these hallucinations. And I didn't realize because they had me on Versed and Propofol and I don't know, a bunch of other medications. And I woke up, I was full of tubes, with IVs and PICC lines and everything. And they had told me, just relax. I was like, okay. So I started having these hallucinations, right? And I'd never hallucinated this hard in my entire life. Like, they gave me some good shit. I started seeing the It Clown coming through the OR door. Wow. There was a guy being wheeled out, and it looked like he had half his heart hanging out of him. There was this other guy getting wheeled out, looked like he'd had gotten half his torso blown out with a 12 gauge. And none of this was really happening. This is just all in my head. But here I am freaking out, right? And I'm telling my family about this later, and they're like, you were sleeping. Yeah. I'm like, oh. Like, I have no recollection of what actually happened, but I have every recollection of all the hallucinations, right? And I ended up getting in an argument with a paper towel dispenser because I thought it was like hitting on me.
Yeah.
And like it was weird. It was a lot of crazy stuff, but so I ended up being in the hospital that time for about 45 days. And I had to get rushed back to ICU because I aspirated one night. And then another time where I couldn't breathe, and they had to rush me back so that I could, they had to rush me back again, do a bronchial scope, which where they manually clean out your lungs, and they knocked me out for 3 days. And so during that time period, I only used opiates once or twice. They gave it to me when I aspirated, and they gave it to me when they had to knock me out. Because I told them when I first started, I was like, do not give me opiates. I'm a heroin addict. And so I did a lot of it with Toradol and ibuprofen, water, you know.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah, roughing it out, man.
Yeah, and they had cut me open in 3 different places. So it was in my back. I had chest tubes in my side for about 3 weeks, and then in my groin. So I got out. I had to learn how to walk again. I had to learn how to do a lot of different things because I'd been laid up in a bed for so long. All of my muscles were gone.
Right.
So all that working out I did in prison, out the window.
Yeah. Man, that happened within a month of you getting out of prison.
2 months.
2 months of you getting out of prison, and you get hit with that, man. And it's just like your entire recovery journey was just like what would normally you would look at as like setback after setback, but really it's like, you know, you were persevering through it all, right? And you just kept going, man. And that's an inspiration in itself, because it's like normally as alcoholics and addicts, that's like right about the time that we just give up.
Yeah.
And we're just like, yeah, fuck this, like I'm out. Like, and I did want to ask, you've been through not only all of the medical things, right, but then also just being incarcerated, and like those are experiences that are so valuable for so many people, especially in the recovery space, as you know. I mean, how do you like use your story to like help people today, and like all of that experience that you have?
So one of the things that I did was I would post a lot of what was going on with me in the hospital on Facebook. And I remember making it very clear, like, I'm not doing this for clout. I'm not doing this because I want to be Facebook famous or because, you know, I want anybody to feel bad for me. I was doing it because I wanted to show people that regardless of what you're going through, it's possible to stay sober and persevere through it, right? And I remember calling all the people I knew in recovery because I was like, I don't want to take these meds. And they were telling me, like, Andrew, like, take the medication. Like, you're in the hospital and they just did all this stuff to you. So you should definitely take it. And so, but one of the things that happened, and this is where the God of my understanding comes in, I was able to recognize that fine line that a lot of us end up crossing, was where I stopped wanting the medication for what it's supposed to be used for, which is the pain, and I started wanting it more for the effect. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I started to recognize that, I told my mom, I was like, and she went and told the doctors, cut it off now. And so that's why I was able to keep my sobriety date, because I didn't get across that line to where I started using it. Because, I mean, I could have easily been like, I'm in pain. Fucking,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Morphine, fentanyl,
morphine shot.
Anything I want, you know.
Yep.
And I was like, I don't want to do that. Right? I've come this far. Why am I going to do that now and mess it all up? So I get out of the hospital and I start to, I'm like, I wanted to go back to work so bad. Yeah. Right? And so my bosses are like, just take it easy. It's okay. So I end up hobbling my little ass to work, you know, and then I had somebody drop me off and trying to climb up these stairs, and it was hard. And they're just looking at me like, what are you doing? Yeah. And I was like, I'm here. And they're like, okay, I guess, right? And so, but I ended up having more complications. I had to go back for a kidney stone about a week after that happened. or a couple weeks after that happened, and they had called me. They're like, hey, can you move into Archways? We'd like for you to help with the houses over there. Mm-hmm. And so I did, and they're like, we'll give you free rent. We'll still pay you full time. And I was like, all right, cool. Like, it blew my mind. So I did, and I ended up having complications with my leg. So where they had cut me around my femoral artery on my groin, I ended up having a bunch of lymphatic fluid buildup. Mm-hmm. So they had to go in and they had to reopen it again. They put what's called a JP drain, which is like a little tube that comes out of your leg. And I'd have to drain it into like a little cup that looks like a UA cup.
Wow.
And like measure it and tell the doctor how much was coming out. And then the tube came out. So I drove myself to the ER, walked in there with fluid just pouring out of my leg.
Wow.
And I'm just like, hey, there's some fluid coming out of my leg. And I mean, it looked like I'd pissed myself.
Yeah.
I was like, nah, it's not urine. That's just lymphatic fluid. And they're like, yeah, you're going to come on back.
Yeah.
And so they put a new one in. They just gave me like some Benadryl and some ibuprofen. And, and I was like, all right, cool. Because they were going to give me fentanyl. And I was like, no.
Right.
And like, oh, well, the only thing we can give you is the non-narcotics is like Benadryl and maybe some Toradol. And I'm like, do that. It hurt.
Yeah.
And so that didn't work either. So they had to go in and open the leg up again and put in what's called a wound vacuum.
Right.
And so what that is where they leave your wound open. So I could see all of my muscles and tendons in my leg, and it didn't hurt that bad. And so they put sponges in there, and then they put a vacuum on it that sucks all of the fluid out.
Wow.
So it was like a whole new meaning of getting your meat sucked, and it doesn't feel as good. But yeah, so, and they told me I had to go sit in a nursing home for 6 weeks. And that's where I spent my first Christmas and New Year's out of prison. Yeah. Was in the nursing home. And I learned a lot of love and tolerance in there. But over all of that, the reason I say all that is because I would still kind of post it on Facebook and give people updates. For one, I wanted everybody to make sure I knew that I was still alive. Yeah. And also, reaching out for help as well, because it was definitely a traumatic thing to go through. And it got to the point to where I didn't think I was going to make it to the end of 2022. And I was okay with that. That's a scary place to be when you're 31 years old, sitting in, with 5.5, almost 6 years sober at the time. And I remember on my 6-year sobriety date, my buddy brought me a chip in the hospital with some Little Caesars pizza and a Pepsi. And we're just hanging out, having a good time. And he's the only person in the program that's seen me naked. And wow. So we were just hanging out, man. And it was cool, though. Like, it was a beautiful thing. They were able to help me out. And so now I get to do that for other people, right? Like, today I'm fully healthy again. I completed parole in May of 2023. Nice. So I have no more legal issues going on.
You're off paper.
Completely off paper, no restitution, nothing.
Wow.
And so I got to I got to fly home after I got off parole. I'm originally from Colorado. And I got to fly back to Denver and see my brother and meet my nephew for the first time, or second time actually. And see a few of my family members I haven't seen since before I went in. And then I also got to go back to work, and now I'm back to work full time. I recently moved out. I spent about a year at Archways, and I got to move out of there recently into my best friend's house. And so now I live with her and her brother, and things are really good today. Like, I got a couple guys in the book, or at least one of them. The other one, I don't know. He hasn't called me yet. And so,
well, I did want to ask you this too. This is something that we ask everybody on the pod. I mean, what's your favorite step out of the 12 steps and why?
Oh, man. I would probably say out of all the 12 steps, my favorite one would probably be the first one. Because I constantly get reminded of that every day, right? I'm still a case manager over at Choice Recovery. And I mean, I deal with it on a daily basis. I get to help people. I get to help newcomers for a living, basically. And so I see it every day.
And
So
you're
for me,
constantly reminded of that
Constant,
powerlessness
every
and
day,
that
all the time.
unmanageability.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And
Yeah.
so it definitely helps me too, being able to help them.
Yeah. And you're on the front lines. I mean, that is literally the front lines of alcoholism and drug addiction when you're seeing people come into treatment. Like it's, I remember I went to the River Source and they took my picture when I showed up, and then, they took a picture after the 30 days and I'm getting ready to go to outpatient, and I look at the picture from when I first showed up and I was like, oh, it's like, you don't realize how bad you were until you see it and you're like, oh man.
Right. So we don't take the picture.
Yeah.
But I just, I get to see them when they come in, and I get to see them when they graduate. And a lot of times it's night and day,
Yeah.
And so now I get to do cool stuff. Like I, was down at a event down in Tucson, and I got to introduce to a woman who does some Zoom stuff. And I got to do Zooms all over the world now. Now I'm involved in this meeting called the Daily Reprieve, which is on Zoom, and a lot of it takes place overseas in Europe. And I get to help find speakers for it and talk to people overseas, and I get to talk to people here. And my life today is a complete 180 from what it was 7 years ago.
Right. And I do want to ask too, this is how we finish every episode. Anybody who's watching, whether it's on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, if they're early in sobriety, maybe they're coming off a relapse, having a hard time coming back, whatever the situation is, do you have any words of encouragement or advice for them?
Yes. Keep going. So regardless of what happens, look, we all fall down sometimes, right? I've had relapses in my life. In my story, you guys heard it earlier. Keep coming back and keep doing the deal. Whether you're 12-step or your Celebrate Recovery or your Smart Recovery or your faith-based, just keep going, because that's what's, don't give up. Regardless, if, somebody told me a long time ago, if we're still breathing, we still have a chance. And so the other thing too is keep reaching out. Right? Because as addicts, our minds go a million miles an hour. It's like a hamster wheel. Just never stops. And so reach out. And we can't go in there by ourselves. We always need adult supervision. I don't care how old you are, because the person who told me that is in his 60s.
Yeah. Yeah, they say your mind is the most dangerous neighborhood there is. Don't go there alone.
Absolutely. Don't go there by yourself. It's not good. You're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah.
Well, dude, thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to kind of touch on before we wrap the episode up?
No, I think most of it's good. I just look, if any of you guys are out there and you are struggling and you are new, pick up that phone, man. I know it sucks and it's hard. I have a hard time with it too sometimes at 7 years sober. But when you pick up that phone and you start calling other people in the program, it definitely makes a big difference in your life, because you never know what the other person might be going through. And it could be something worse or something not as bad. But either way, you get to help each other. And that's what I think this program is based off of. It's just people helping other people.
That's the best way to put it, man.
Thank you.
Alcoholics helping other alcoholics.
Yeah.
Drug addicts helping other drug addicts. It's funny you say that. I was just having a conversation with my with some guys in my accountability group, and it's just literally we were talking about sober living, and we're this is, if you were to just break it down literally to somebody who has no idea about recovery, no idea about any of this, and you say, we have a house full of drug addicts, and we just take one drug addict who has a little more clean time than the other ones, and we have them manage the other drug addicts that live in the house, and they all hold each other accountable. You would think that's an absurd idea. You'd say that's crazy, but it's that's really what, when you boil it down, that's what the program is. It's just alcoholics and addicts helping other alcoholics and addicts along the journey.
Yeah, that's it. That's all that we do.
Yeah.
Right? And I mean, not all that we do, but primarily, and think, for me, the best high I've ever gotten was from helping another alcoholic or another drug addict.
Yeah.
So that's something that definitely makes my life, gives me purpose and makes my life worth living. Is, I love to help people and I love to share my story because I hope that even if it's one person gets something out of it, like that's the reason that I do this stuff.
Well, that's awesome, man. And thank you so much for sitting down with us this morning, day after Christmas, and sharing your story with us. I think this is going to help a lot of our listeners out, and we're super appreciative of you stopping by. Also, just a quick shout out to Plugged In Recovery, the sponsor of the pod. If you guys are any of you looking for sober living in the Chandler, Phoenix, Scottsdale area, please reach out 612-505-5494. And also shout out to Buena Vista Recovery. Thank you for all of your support on the pod as well. We will see you guys next week.
Awesome. Thank you guys. I hope everybody has a really happy and safe New Year's. And again, Merry late Christmas to you guys. And shout out to Wade and Plugged In Recovery, as well as all the other sober livings that are out there as well. It's like Archways and, the Lighthouse. All the ones that are out there. There's too many to list. But thank you guys so much for having me. And thank you, Eric, for having me here. This has been a really fun experience. So that's really it.
All right. Well, thank you guys. We'll see you next week.